Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crash Zoom. I'm Sammie Purcell, Associate Editor with Rough Draft Atlanta, and I'm here with Aaron Strand, an independent filmmaker here in Atlanta. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing all right, Sammie. I am surviving today. My daughter is out of daycare once again. It has been 2025 has been nothing but school closures and sicknesses, and now a lice outbreak. So, but that's small potatoes as compared to what's happening in the world. So I'm just trying to
Sure.
focus on my little problems and try to just survive through the day.
Snow and lice just ruining your days off.
Snow and lice. Snow and
Yeah.
lice is the name of the game.
Absolutely. Well, if you're new to Crash Zoom and you've never listened to the show before, first of all, welcome. What Aaron and I like to do here is we take a look at things that are going on in the film industry, so kind of big picture news items, and we try to boil them down and figure out why they matter to the independent filmmaker. So that's what we'll be doing. But before we get to that, I have one question for you, Aaron. What have you been watching lately? What's been tickling your fancy?
It's been a really light watching lately. It's been really,
Mm-hmm.
really light. I have not watched a lot of stuff. It's been really tough. I really can only report that I've watched Zootopia with
Wow.
with my
Okay.
daughter.
How did she
I
like
watched.
it? What'd she think?
Oh, she thought it was just pure propaganda. She hated it. She hated Bunny Hops or whatever the
That's what I hear
lead
all the
character's
3-year-olds
name.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she was already upset about Paw Patrol, and then she found out about Zootopia. No, she loved it. I was pretty blasé on the whole experience.
Hmm.
But yeah, look, like I between kind of work on the podcast, work on the post production of Withdrawal, and then I'm deep in writing for the next film because as I get ready for this festival run of Withdrawal, it's like you want to have all your pitch materials and script and whatever ready for the next film.
Hmm.
So I've been really dedicating that critical 8:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. time slot to writing, which is usually when I watch movies. So the movie
Yeah.
watching has been light. What about you?
So I was actually just looking up these movies to make sure that I get the directors' names in here because I've been finishing up my Sundance kind of online aspect of the festival. So I finished that all this weekend, over the weekend. So, I've watched some, festivals are always a little bit of like hit or miss, but I watched a couple or a few really interesting, at least interesting, and then some that I really, really loved movies over the weekend. One I want to mention was Zodiac Killer Project. It's by Charlie Shackleton. And it is really fascinating because it's essentially they were going to make this documentary based on a book. It's a guy named Lyndon who has like a really specific person that he thinks is the Zodiac Killer. He wrote this book kind of after Robert Graysmith's book, which is sort of the big Zodiac book, and so
Yeah.
it's not quite as well known, but essentially they were like going through all the hoops to get the rights to this book, and then the family of this guy eventually was like, no, well, we don't want to do this anymore. And so the entire movie then is just basically Charlie Shackleton like narrating what they would have done in as much detail as he can without actually having the rights to the book. And through that, it sort of becomes like an interesting exploration of how all of these true crime documentaries are essentially all the same. Like it's kind of a not satire, but like a media commentary in that way, like more of a commentary on the genre than a part of the genre itself. It can get a little, I think, like it can get a little slow because a lot of it is just like a guy doing a lot of narration over location b-roll. So like it's not necessarily like incredibly visually interesting, but it is just kind of like an interesting exercise, I think, in terms of filmmaking and thinking about the way different genres are sort of constructed.
That sounds awesome. I mean, it really
Yeah.
popped out to me on the Sundance announcement, like
Hmm.
and we talked about it when the lineup was
Yeah.
unveiled. I think we're really sort of I feel very hungry for the sort of like post true crime, like
Yeah.
post true crime post mortem, and
It's
so
definitely that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm very
Mhm.
excited to see this film.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, I watched another documentary called Predators, which is from a guy called David Osit. And it's about kind of the rise and fall and the legacy of To Catch a Predator, which, like, if you grew up in the early 2000s, you remember what that is. And it is also kind of like a postmortem on true crime a little bit. It's like really interested in what justice actually is. Like, it kind of centers on, if you remember the show, you remember Chris Hansen always asks, like, why are you here? Or make me understand is like kind of his like calling card. Like, help me understand why you're doing this. What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
And the director, who is a survivor of child sexual assault themselves, is sort of like really wrestling with that question. And if, like, you know, does the show ever actually honestly truly try to answer that question? And like, what's the difference between like justice in the sense of like legal justice and what happens to the people who are on To Catch a Predator and like a more kind of like court of public opinion type justice? It was a really, really fascinating documentary. It makes you feel a lot of feelings. I had like a really long conversation about it with someone who hadn't seen it. So that was fun after the fact. But and then the other one that I want to shout out is called Plainclothes. This is just a narrative film. It is by Carmen Emmy. And it is about a cop in the 90s in small town, kind of like upstate New York, who he is basically like an undercover agent luring and entrapping gay men in like public restrooms and stuff, and then like arresting them for public indecency. And he kind of starts to examine that role when he falls in love with a target. So he himself is like having, feelings for men and wrestling with that. It kind of reminded me of The Conversation a little bit, mostly in like the way it deals with what does a person do when they are so aware of the fact that, like, when a person is watching someone and surveilling, they become hyper aware of the fact that we are always being watched and like always under surveillance. And it
Yeah.
uses like a lot of interesting kind of like editing techniques that I think some people, there was some kind of critiques about it that were like that was a little confusing or disorienting or et cetera, et cetera. But it didn't disorient me at all. I found it like pretty compelling. So those are three I want to call out, but had a nice
Wow.
little end of Sundance run. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, some real
Mhm.
light watching, it sounds like. Any of
Oh,
these
yeah.
would pair wonderfully with Zootopia, for the record.
Absolutely.
A double bill. The Sammy Aaron special, a little
Mhm.
Zootopia,
Little predators,
a little Predators. Yeah,
Little
exactly. I think
predators, yeah.
yeah, wow. So, are you sleeping well?
I've had, like, weird dreams, but that's kind of par for the course, so it's fine. It's totally fine. Okay, let's get into some of these news items this week. So, the first one is from Ankler. It's by Elaine Lowe, and it's titled Indie TV, quote, holy shit, this is a viable model. I don't know. I really like that. I love that headline for some reason. I think it's really captures like a real feeling, and captures the independent spirit. um, but so it essentially starts with, if you guys don't know who Cooper Rafe, how do you say his last name, Joe? Is it
I think
Rafe?
it's Rafe.
Rafe? Okay. Cooper Rafe, who's an indie filmmaker. I think a few years ago, his most recent film was Cha Cha Real Smooth, had Dakota Johnson. Speaking of Dakota Johnson, she's becoming a real mainstay on this podcast. Maybe just by Aaron's desires,
Yeah.
but
Acquaintance of the pod. I don't know if
yeah.
I'd call her a friend of the pod, but
Yeah,
acquaintance of the
acquaintance of the
pod.
pod. But so that was his movie. It came out, I want to say, like 2022, a few years ago, something like that. And he has something else at Sundance this year. He had something else at Sundance this year. It was a TV show called Helen Harper. So it stars him. He often stars in a lot of his projects. Mark Ruffalo and Lily. Oh my God, I'm blanking on her name. Riverdale.
Lily Tomlin.
Lily Reinhart. Lily
Lily
Reinhart.
Reinhart.
Not Lily Tomlin. And Lily Reinhart. Sorry to Lily Reinhart. But it's a TV show, and this Inkler is part of their Substack, so you can kind of go and read it there if you subscribe. But basically kind of argues that Helen Harper is sort of part of this new wave of indie filmmakers exploring the indie TV model. So basically kind of using funding outside of the studio system. So what independent filmmakers have kind of been doing for a long time. I would say kind of like mimicking the filmmaking scene of the late 80s, early 90s, but doing it in the television world instead, with the intent to then license or sell that show to a streamer or network instead of like working with someone in development to sort of like develop a TV at a streamer or a studio. So that's a little background on that. But I wanted to sort of ask you, as sort of a film person, as I find a lot of people, you can really sense like a divide between like film people and TV people. So I wanted to kind of start with asking you, like, how do you feel about kind of like an independent film technique and buzz kind of being utilized for TV and maybe moving people who would have made films, like possibly pushing them to maybe try TV instead?
Yeah, I don't see a real future here. I'm not really
Hmm.
buying what they're selling
Hmm.
here, and I kind of find the catchy title of the article,
It is a very
the
catchy
catchy
title.
headline. Yeah, but it's like it's totally
Yeah.
irrelevant because the quote "Holy shit, this is a viable model" is from Mark Duplass 10
Mhm.
years ago, talking about
Yeah.
selling animals at Sundance.
Mhm.
And it's really the only other success story that people have to reference as far as a television show that was produced, outside of just a pilot as part of a pitch,
Mhm.
and then sold to a studio model. I think about this in terms of like, uh, you encounter so many of these people within the independent film world, and I'm sure there's some people listening right now who their dream is to make a pilot, is to pitch a television show. That is their indie filmmaking dream. And to these people, when I encounter them in the world, usually I just kind of hold my tongue and I nod and I say, "Oh, that's great. That's really cool." But
Yeah.
internally, and if I know them well enough, I'll ask them, "Why? Why would
Mhm.
you ever do this?" First of all, the major problem with this art form and what they cite in the article, and it's one of the major problems even on the studio level of working on any of these things, is it's way, way, way too long. It takes way too long
Yeah.
to develop a television show, to develop a narrative that can stretch over the number of episodes required to make a television show. Even at the shorter episode buys of 8 or 10, that's still like two feature films back to back, and you need to have a narrative arc that sustains over that with climaxing act breaks in between. Very, very hard to do. All of this labor goes unpaid, and the independent television world is so it just doesn't exist. I mean, no one
Mhm.
there's no buyer's market, there's no one thirsting for this, there's no one clamoring for it. So where there's so little hope on the back end. I mean, even less than independent narrative features, which is already like there's so little hope in selling your film
Mhm.
at this stage of the game now. Um so there's no buyers, and I mean this is like but I do see that this is like all part of the evolution from the peak TV streaming boom cycle, because
Yeah.
everybody's looking back and they're like it happens all the time amongst independent filmmakers. Everybody's looking back and it's like, well, if only I could do what the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia guys, right? Like we always
Mhm.
talk about, oh, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They went out, they shot their own pilot with Sony DV camcorders, and look at them. They went and sold it to FX or
Mhm.
whatever, and look at them, 28 seasons later.
Really.
Or people reference Issa Rae, right? Who had her YouTube series Awkward Black Girl transition into her Insecure run at
Mhm.
HBO. But like that is such a different era. Like that is just not how things work right now. Let me tell you how things work. Like if you want to develop a television show, you need to partner with a development studio who has the connections to pitch your show to a major studio. So first of all, you're gonna spend years of your life developing this property, your pitch materials, and everything. And I'm talking if you're an unknown, and
Yeah.
you're gonna do that with some sort of like with some sort of development studio. Those people now come on, they are now your luggage producers. You're going to be carrying that luggage through the airport for the rest of your travels in the entertainment industry. And those people are going to be, you're going to have to pay for every bag, right? Those people are going to go out and pitch to a studio. If that studio likes your pitch, they are then going to rip your baby from your arms, put it with a showrunner that is trusted within the industry, because no one's going to make the investment on a television show and trust someone unknown. Like it
Mhm.
does not happen. And those people are going to take your baby and probably like lop all of its arms and legs off. And by the
Mhm.
time, if that's a snowball's chance in hell that it actually gets to a pilot being shot, or it gets an episode order from a network, you will have long been cut out of the operation. You'll probably get some sort of like meager pay between $20,000 and $30,000 like for your idea, and you're done. And all the luggage producers that you picked up on the way, they're going to get like a little bit of that show. But like it's a terrible business model. It's a terrible artistic model. So I understand, when faced with that, why people would look to go to the
Why
indie
this would
route.
appeal. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
like it's all like, I see it as part of the long evolution of like, it's all the people who were inspired by television in the early 2010s,
Mhm.
were watching all those amazing shows that were on back then,
Yeah.
and they want to do that, but like I just don't really see how it's possible. Like the market is so congested. It's so it's there's so much competition.
Yeah, I know, Mark Duplass has like a quote in here, cuz I just like can't really get past the expensive it. And he even mentions, like, he says it's a little more expensive up front because obviously in order to make a whole season of TV, it's much more running time than a 90-minute film. But besides the barrier to entry, everything else to me models perfectly. And I'm like, but that's a big barrier to entry. And like Cooper Rafe is someone who like has a little bit more cachet, like he's like been around a lot. He's like made movies that people like and enjoy. And like maybe someone like that like has the ability to like make the hop over. I don't think Howland Harper has been bought yet.
Nope.
That's something that no, it hasn't. Okay, awesome. Well, not awesome, but you know what I mean.
As,
I wasn't
yeah.
wrong. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome for Sammie, not
Awesome for
awesome for
me
Cooper
not
Rafe.
being wrong. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, but it's just like, maybe you could say that like it models perfectly. And like you said, like I understand why people would this would draw people to it in the hopes that like their show wouldn't be a lop to all hell and changed to all hell. And Cooper Rafe kind of talks about that a little bit with Howland Harper kind of saying like they wanted to like make it more of a college show. They wanted to get rid of the father character that Mark Ruffalo plays. And like I understand why the model would appeal to someone who doesn't want to deal with all that rigmarole, but that's a big barrier to entry. It's really expensive to make a television show.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
biggest it also ties into another problem that's like that is like downstream of the like the inner of just how the internet operates and how it kind of flattens everything. And I've nicknamed this the voice paradox. Okay.
Okay.
The voice paradox. And this is all based on the reality show The Voice. Are you familiar with The Voice,
I am
Sammie?
familiar with the voice. Big
Okay.
button, turn around.
Yeah, I actually don't watch the show. My wife does, but I
Okay.
get the gist. I get the gist. Okay, but the issue with The Voice, and the weird thing about The Voice as a television show, is that it does not create superstars. Like
Mm-mm.
none of the contestants that come out of The Voice have gone on to become superstars in their career, because the contestants and their creative spark get subsumed into the cult of the coach. Right. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not just that, it's not your talent there to shine. Your talent is like part of Usher's team or Gwen Stefani's team. And Gwen
Mm-hmm.
Stefani then like leeches off your artistic creativity to further her reputation. And she's the one who's like getting all of your shine. And
Mm-hmm.
this is like a little weird example of how the internet concentrates power and fame into the hands of very few, because when everyone is given the same access and there is this democratization of of creativity, the power structure sort of reconfigures and it forces more power into less people. So you even have a quote unquote like show that exemplifies many of the independent qualities that an indie TV show would look for, such as Baby Reindeer, which is an amazing success story and had
Yeah.
no sort of like big stars, beforehand, and was this wildly popular show, but it is subsumed by the Netflix of it all. Like
Yeah.
and Netflix markets itself before it markets its shows. So it's not like back in the day of like, holy shit, you've got to watch Breaking Bad, dude. Breaking Bad is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's amazing. What network is it on? I don't know. Oh, it's you can watch it on Netflix, or you can stream it there or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
no one, it's not about AMC, the network.
No.
It's about
Yeah.
Breaking Bad. Well, it's totally inverted now. Now it's like, oh, Netflix is putting out content. Netflix is putting out this. Netflix is putting out that. And everything just gets lost in the wash of it. And so this
Mhm.
is another thing that really hurts the independent creators, because you need people who are willing to like build up the reputation of the show as opposed to valuing the reputation of the brand. And right now, all the energy is on the brand, and all of the shine of any independent creator is just going to be sucked away by the large entity.
Yeah, that reminds me, and I wrote about this when it happened, but I went to like a, I think it's called Geek Week or Geeked Week. It's something
Yeah.
Netflix does just to like, so, announcing new shows or whatever it might be, new movies and stuff. And there was a part of it, it was at the Eastern, and there was a section where they did like trivia for different shows. And some of the shows I'd heard of, like I think there were like some Stranger Things questions or whatever in there. But a lot of it was just stuff like I had never even like thought, like just stuff I had no idea what it was. And what I thought was so interesting is I was like, I'm sitting in the crowd, and the people there, to from my outside purview, were like seem to be filling a role as like fans of Netflix, not fans of a specific show. Like during that trivia thing, it wasn't that like, oh, like, the Shadow and Bone people, not that Shadow and Bone was represented, but the Shadow and Bone people are like those fans are over here, and like the Stranger Things fans are over here, or like there's this new horror movie coming out, It's What's Inside, like the people who are excited for that are like over here. It was just they were all fans of like Netflix first and foremost, and that meant that you had to like know everything about every single Netflix property, which all of these people really seem to, because they were all screaming out the answers to every single trivia question. And I was like, what? What's going on? And that was like really, it just had like a sinister undertone to me. Like, if we're all going to be like really big fans of Netflix first and foremost, like not the show that they're putting out, which is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Or they're like, which quarter of 2022 did we grow our subscriber
No,
base by?
no,
And
no.
people are like, Q3. That's like the real Netflix like
The
trivia.
real Netflix ads. No, it was
Yeah.
just like crazy stuff. I don't know. It was wild. But
Yeah, my wife recommended that we watch. She had watched the Netflix show One Day. I don't know if
oh,
you've seen
yeah. Oh,
this.
yes,
Yeah,
I did. It sobbed my eyes out.
yeah. Well, so I literally do not watch television shows, but I've
Yeah.
been watching this with her,
Hmm.
and I find the performance of the lead actress Mbika Mod like
She's
just
great.
incredible. I think
So good.
she's
Hmm.
amazing, and it hurts like, and I know like she's gotten acclaim for it. She's
Hmm.
gotten like notice for this, but like this should be a way bigger deal. People should be talking
Hmm.
about this performance, but it just gets buried. Like
Yeah.
it's because you're drinking from a fire hose, like from the Netflix fire hose. And it's just yet another example of the sort of like of the artistic flame just getting extinguished by the Netflix
Yeah.
flood.
And what's funny about that is like One Day is based on a book,
Right.
which there was a movie that came out
Yeah.
like a
Anne
decade
Hathaway
ago.
movie.
Right. And like
Yeah.
that movie's not very good, but like people know that movie. Like people go, oh
Yeah.
yeah, like the Anne Hathaway movie. And like this television show I think is a much better adaptation. Like you can sit with them a little more, like the structure of it makes more sense. You have time to like give space to these days. But like I ask people if they've heard of it, and most people are like, oh no, like, but like
Yep.
everyone knows the bad movie because it like took up more space in the culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
It kind of
Yeah.
sucks. But
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. So
All right.
so to bring it all back, like
Yeah.
how is an independently produced television show supposed to operate within this tight and this oversaturated of a market? It's going to require a new means of distribution or a sort of rediscovery. Look, no one's ever made drama really work on YouTube post 2010, 2011, the like web series like days. So
Yeah.
like, is YouTube a viable delivery model for independent narrative drama? Like no one's really done it yet. But outside of that, like it's going to take something totally new, we just don't have it.
Yeah. And speaking, I think that distribution question leads well into sort of the next article that we've got on the docket here. So this is a report from Sundance. It comes from The Wrap. It's by Sharon Waxman. And it starts off, I think, with a pretty great lead. She says, quote, "On Sunday, a group of smart, experienced, and passionate film lovers gathered at the Sundance Film Festival to confront an issue that has become overwhelmingly obvious. Independent film does not currently have a viable business model." So you and me, Aaron, we've actually talked about this a lot sort of over the past few weeks. There is an audience for independent film. Carrie Putnam and her independent study come up again in this article. There are filmmakers who want to do it. There are apparently
A
people,
lot of
there are
filmmakers.
a lot. There are people who are interested. So, like, where is the distribution system for these films? They're getting made, they're at Sundance, but where is the distribution model? And basically, this article, I think, kind of makes the point that the IndieWire article that I believe we talked about last week, kind of talking about trying to find, like, is there like a way we can put all of the independent film on one big distribution into one big distribution method, whether it's streaming or whatever it might be. And that's just what we have. And this article kind of points to the lack of that, the lack of like distribution or a viable distribution model as sort of the problem with independent film. And at the writing of this article, or the publishing of this article, I should say, I don't know how much of this has changed. The only films that have been bought out of this year's Sundance are Together, which is a body horror film starring Alison Brie and Dave Franco, and then the Joel Edgerton
So
movie.
indie.
So indie. And then the Joel Edgerton movie Train Dreams. So those went to
So
Neon and
indie.
Netflix, respectively. And then it also makes, I think, the good point. I was disappointed I didn't get to see this, but I think it's a good point that, like, the big movie at Sundance this year was a remake of Kiss of the Spider Woman
Kiss of the
starring
Spider Woman
J-Lo,
with
and it cost
Jennifer
$60 million.
Lopez.
Like, you know,
So indie.
yeah,
It's
you know.
so indie.
And that's not to like disparage. Like, I saw a lot of great independent films there. I get you need like these big kind of marquee things to like get people interested, but what do we do sort of about this distribution model? And I think a lot of the stuff they brought up was kind of what the IndieWire article brought up last week. Just like, can we get these small art house distributors to share their data to try to like expand their audiences? Can we roll up kind of the smaller distributors to create a larger way of getting these films out there? But I don't know what the answer is. So, yeah, I guess I'll throw it over to you. I know we've talked about having better questions leading up to that, but I get lost in my rambles sometimes.
No, it's good. I'll throw out.
Yeah.
There are 3 more titles that have sold.
Okay,
out
awesome.
Out of Sundance. We've got a short film from our good friends over at Asteria, the AI studio. They sold their VR short film, The Reality of Hope.
Okay.
So, and I'm actually not sure who the buyer is on that, but it's a small sum. Sorry Baby sold to A24 yesterday.
Okay.
From the social media influencer and writer director Eva Victor, that sold for $8 million. And then the 1-to-1 John and Yoko documentary also sold to Magnolia, undisclosed amount, but still an incredibly slow sales at Sundance. The buyers are not buying, and that's the biggest thing, is because the streamers are not buying. Netflix is not buying indies; they have no interest in them. The indies, to them, the risk is too high, and they can do all of it in house. Why would they go out and pay a premium? Not to mention that, like, many of the streamers I think are still living in the shadow of what happened with Nate Parker and Birth of a Nation from back in 2016. If you don't know, director Nate Parker made this film Birth of a Nation about the Harper's Ferry raid, right? And but then pretty quickly some very troubling rape allegations from his college were uncovered after the deal closed. It was the largest sale in the history of Netflix, or I'm sorry, largest sale in the history of Sundance at the time. It was considered to be poised for like an Oscar run. But these very troubling allegations came out about the creator. And I think that unfortunately, like, it just sucks because like a lot of these major corporations look at sort of independent artists, and it's just like, why worth the risk? It's just, why take the risk? It's not worth it to them. Why deal in like any dangerous ideas when everything is reflecting on the mega corporation. There's just too much money at stake to even try. And so I think, look, I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction because, like, we've talked about sort of the distribution of independent film
Sure.
to death. Ultimately, it comes down into a supply and demand issue, and just that there is an oversupply even for the demand that is being referenced over and over again that we reference over and over again from this study from Carrie Putnam. The demand is just higher than ever. There are more independent
Yeah.
films produced. There was over 16,000 submissions to Sundance this year, more than any in history. At the peak levels of independent film back in 2015, you still had way fewer independent films being made than you do today. So we just have it's an oversupply problem, and the market is reflecting that oversupply. Because even if you were to have a distribution solution, you're going to still require some sort of algorithmic sorting to just sort through this massive supply of independent films to elevate anything to anybody who wants to watch it. So, and then it just recycles the same problems with the internet over and over again. But I do want to take this in a different direction because I think that this is ultimately also a Sundance issue, because
Mm-hmm.
Sundance is kind of caught, I think, between two worlds of the festivals, right? They, their core value and their core mission supposedly is centered around discovery. Like, it's supposed to be about announcing the next generation of great American filmmakers. They are not supposed to be the red carpet of Cannes or Venice or Toronto. Like, those are
Yeah.
star art house vehicles. That is a very different sort of thing. But Sundance is kind of like caught in the middle because they're trying. It's like they know they need the stars to get
Yeah.
the press out, to get the
Mm-hmm.
names out, to get people excited. But by staying true to or trying to stay true to their mission, they end up with also like B-level stars as their headliners of like the Dave
Mm-hmm.
Francos of the world. And like, look, nothing against Dave Franco, but like, or you get someone who's like an absolute A-list star in Jennifer
Like
Lopez,
J-Lo. Yeah.
but who, like, her whole ethos could not align less with what the
Mm-hmm.
true mission of Sundance is. And people look at that and like they can just smell bullshit, like
Mm-hmm.
like the audiences look and just say like, what is there to be excited about here? Like, this is not exciting in the same way that it used to be. And the truth is that like all the big successes, when you think about the greatest Sundance films ever made, I mean, we're talking like Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Reservoir Dogs, 13, Party Girl, Blair Witch Project,
Yeah.
Secretary. These are like dangerous movies. These are
Mm-hmm.
movies that have like an air of like, oh my God, like, did you see that? Whether it's through violence, sex, real like edgy material that
Mm-hmm.
has something like really bold to say. And I think that in this market that is dominated by fear of working with dangerous people and dangerous ideas. And like, I know this is like somehow cycling around of like, I'm not saying that like Nate Parker should get a pass or anything, but it's like,
Sure.
but that these movements, and even this does tie into sort of like cancel culture and sort of like internet conversations around artists, that like it has created a buying and creative environment that is centered around fear. And so it's constricted the air out of the mission that Sundance like should be upholding. And I think that is just as much to do with the slow sales that we're seeing as anything else.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the movies that I saw at Sundance, like I would call like a good swath swath of them swath um of them bold. Like I think about like something, I saw this movie Brides. It's about like two teenage girls who decide to run away from home and go to Syria. And like, you know, I wouldn't call anything about that movie like safe, but at the same time I'm like, is someone going to come along and purchase that movie who's worried about like making any type of political statement, like whatever it might be? And like you can have like different ideas that you draw from the politics of that film, but like it is interesting thinking about like, and I was reading this made me really consider one thing, is that like why it feels like people are now just now, and I guess it's been rumbling, but are just now like finally starting to feel comfortable saying like streamers are the problem. Like maybe that's been percolating around, but it says it right in this article, like the streamers that dominate the entertainment business, mostly Netflix, are the problem. Like they're the reason like there's this like dearth of like good independent good independent films coming out of Sundance and being bought up and like given to a more broad audience. And I think like if there's any silver lining to be taken from this, at least people are recognizing that. And maybe someone with any like modicum of power will try to like do something about it or circumvent it in some way. But maybe that's me reaching.
Yeah, you can only
Hmm.
hope that like the sort of discontent and the hunger like actually translates actually moves markets. Like
Yeah.
somebody it will require someone to come around and like see this as an opportunity and effectively market, edgy, bold, dangerous storytelling and
Hmm.
turn it into a cool commodity that people want to take part in. And right now, like no one is really able to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hear you. That movie sounds super cool. Never, I first really I'm hearing about it. I was pretty
Right.
shocked. I was pretty shocked that IndieWire recently released their sort of like, just total, God, publicist written article of like 11 breakouts from Sundance this year. And I
Hmm.
just thought they were eye roll inducing. They're
Hmm.
highlighting literally like the safest members of the like, whether it's like a child actor in Omaha or like just whoever's like Lucas Hedges adjacent. No shots at Lucas Hedges, but it's like,
Hey,
come on,
don't
man.
come for
Like,
my guy.
hey, I wouldn't exactly. He's not Abel Ferrera over here. Uh, uh, like I don't know. It's just it was just sort of like it just was the kind of like industry safe industry glad handing that makes everyone roll their eyes at Sundance. And I'll be honest, like even though they have those 16,000 submissions and at some level every independent filmmaker feels in their heart that they have to submit to Sundance just out of the small chance that they have of getting in, the conversations around Sundance are not aspirational. It's eye rolling.
Hmm.
It's, oh, that's an insider club that you will never get into. That is and it's basic, it's essentially people saying it's an industry plan. It's just an industry cover for Hollywood to like congratulate its own quote unquote indiness. And people think it's turning into a joke of itself
Hmm.
because of the money involved and because of the lack of excitement from the buzz coming out of it.
It's interesting you bring up Omaha just because I quite liked that movie, but in a lot of ways it is like the exact example of what you're talking about as far as like a Sundance, quote unquote, like a Sundance movie. It's like pretty emotionally taxing. It's about like a political issue, but really examining it from like a very insular, like familial level. John Magara was there, as he
Stars John
usually
Magara.
is.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He is the new
Uh,
Sundance. Who was it that you
yeah.
mentioned the other day? It was like Mr. Sundance from back in the day. Um,
Oh, I don't remember. Not Rachel Sennett. She beat Miss Sundance.
yeah, Aubrey Plaza. It was Aubrey
Aubrey
Plaza and Jesse
Plaza.
Eisenberg for there for a
There
little
we
bit.
go.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I think
But
it's John
it's
Magara now.
interesting.
John
Yeah.
Magara is now Mr. Sundance. If you don't have John Magara, you're not getting in. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's interesting because while I really enjoyed that movie, I do think in a lot of ways it's like much simpler to talk about because like the I don't want to like give away what it's about for people who might see it because I'm sure people will see it at some point. But it is you watch that movie and you're like, well, obviously I feel awful about what's unfolding on my screen. Like it is in some ways, and I don't say this to like bash it, but like a well-meaning like liberal person can watch it and like feel awful about what they just watched transpire. And I do think something like Brides, to bring it up again, is like way thornier than any of that. And I just my hope would be that I'm sad that like you hadn't heard of it because I quite enjoyed it. I think it's a little like maybe divisive, but like I think that is one of the great things that can come out of Sundance. Like, let's argue
Yeah.
about a movie. I saw this other movie to bring it up that like I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Brides. It's called Touch Me, but like the amount of like walkouts in the screening, it involves like alien tentacle sex, which
Oh.
like, which like is another thing of where I'm like, yeah, I didn't enjoy it as much as like maybe some other films that I saw, but great, amazing. I'm so glad you're doing that. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like genuinely, like very glad. But a lot of people walked out, which I found very funny.
That's awesome. Yeah,
But
I'm
yeah.
interested now.
All right, so let's move on to our next item. So this is also from The Wrap. It was written by Lori Seitz, I believe is how you say that name. It's about a stay in LA petition that's been circulating. So this was started by Sarah Adina Smith, an indie filmmaker, and Alexandra Pechman or Peckman. I'm not quite sure how to say that. A writer and director, both LA based. And essentially, they've started this Stay in LA petition kind of after the wildfires that have been devastating Los Angeles over the beginning of the year, and are just trying to get people to keep production in LA. So they've partnered with a couple organizations, California United and the Union Solidarity Coalition, which this petition calls upon California politicians to basically uncap the tax incentive for productions that shoot in LA County for the next 3 years, as well as studios and streamers to pledge at least 10% more production in LA over the next 3 years. So, this, I mean, I guess we'll just start there and kind of go off of it. If LA were to take on this, which I kind of don't understand why they haven't really already. Obviously, this might have like implications for Georgia or shooting elsewhere in the US. There's been a big European and overseas push that's happened recently that's affected Georgia as well. I mean, like if you look at the kind of list of big productions filming in Georgia on the Georgia Film Office's website. And of course, you're not like required to put your production there. It's usually kind of bigger productions or reality productions. It's been really, really light lately. Like I think it's been, don't quote me on this, but last time I checked, it's been stuck at 15 for like a month. Like it just hasn't really gone anywhere. But I guess like what really is interesting to me about this and what I've sort of thought for a while is I don't really understand why Los Angeles hasn't like thought about this sooner, I guess. And obviously these are indie filmmakers. This isn't like someone at like a government level who's like started this kind of petition, even though Gavin Newsom has sort of like, been touting this for a while. But it's just interesting to me that it takes like, which I guess this is how people work, like takes like such a devastating event to actually like push people at a lower level to try to make this possible. I don't know. That's what kind of like struck me about this the most, I think. But
Yeah, sure. To put it frankly, the reason why they haven't done this is pure arrogance.
yeah,
They haven't thought they've needed to
yeah,
do this. There's always been a perception that film lives in LA. Hollywood is the center of the film universe. Why should we give discounts to the people that want to live here, that want to work here, and will always work here in the first place? And it's not, look, it's not just like one disaster, right? This is the
no, yeah,
it's subsequent disasters from COVID
sure.
uh,
Strikes.
to the strikes and now with the fires that have really that have been and those are all caught up within major macro forces that have just made not only the number of productions be at an all-time low because the major media players have all gone through extreme cost-cutting measures. They're simply just not buying the number of shows that they were back when the streaming boom was happening toward the end of the 2020 toward the end of the 20 teens and into the 2020s with the COVID as everyone tried to get as much content to grab as much market share of the streaming market as possible. So we have less shows being bought than ever before. We've talked about it before. The ways that streaming has completely reshaped the money pie that's available. There's less money available on an individual basis for individual shows. There's less because the streaming is less profitable than linear cable ever was. So there's just less money involved. So everyone's cutting costs. And then it's caught up in all these major macro forces, which is that the United States has experienced like high inflation. The prices of everything has gone through the roof. American workers are demanding their fair share of the profits that are coming in, but it only drives the cost of producing here further and further up. Meanwhile, in countries such as Canada, which is like has I think like four of movie maker magazines like best place to work as a filmmaker cities right now. Right now like
Mm-hmm.
Toronto, Calgary,
Me,
and
Vancouver.
Vancouver like all rank very highly as far as production. The Canadian dollar is depreciating, and with the tariffs that Donald Trump just signed into law this week, that is only going to further depreciate the Canadian dollar, which is for producers going to translate into essentially a 50% discount because their dollar goes so much farther in Canada than it does in the United States. On top of the fact that Toronto has like I think it's around, I think it's like 40% of a tax incentive
Mhm.
on their film productions without a spending cap and with above the line budget items contributing toward the spend. So all these things make it just incredibly attractive to film overseas in Canada, in the UK, or in Eastern Europe in ways that the US just can't compete. Now, in thinking about this, I did want to like take it back. It's like, why is film in LA in the first place? You
Oh my
know,
gosh,
and
history
like,
lesson.
how did we even get here? Yeah, let's take it all back. So take it. We're going all the way back to the 1900s here, because the conventional wisdom is like, oh, it's sunny in LA, and that's why they filmed there, and it doesn't rain a lot. And
Mhm.
that's partially true. But the real reason why LA became a film center is because people were escaping Thomas Edison, the Thomas Edison Company's patent enforcement through the Edison Trust, which included their number one competitor, filmmaking competitor in the 1900s, Biograph, and the Eastman Kodak Company, which made all of the film stock available. They basically ran a cartel that tried to control every film that was being made in America. If you were making a film with any of their equipment, they would come and they would shut you down. It was corrupt. The mob was involved. They paid off judges. And you basically could not make a film without giving a massive amount of any money you made to the Edison Trust.
Mm.
So back in the day, you could go out west and escape their like web of control, their mafia connections and their corrupt judges, and you could make independent film, on your own out in California. And now this is where the sort of weather and affordability of land come into it because of the consistency of the sunlight. All of these stages back in the day were outdoors. They
Outside,
would use,
yeah.
yeah, they would use a muslin cloth hung over the stages to diffuse the sunlight for interiors. But that's how you lit your production back before sort of movie lighting was like a thing
Mhm.
in the silent days. And then on top of that, the weather, and because there was a lot of cheap land available. Now, once Hollywood was established and we're getting into sort of the 20s and 30s, and it's making all this money, the reason why film stayed there is because film it was tethered to physical reality. Like it
Mhm.
became this highly technical, specialized process where you needed not only like all this camera equipment, you need potentially all the soundstage equipment, the processing of the film, everything was tethered to that fine celluloid material and the intricate both pre and post processing of it. Like that was so specialized, like it had to be concentrated in a central place. Furthermore, you had Hollywood unions that basically like crushed anybody trying to bring these trade secrets like outside of the union control. I did a whole series on Melvin Van Peebles for over on the Behind the Slate
Mhm.
podcast. And it's very interesting when Melvin Van Peebles was filming Sweetback's Badass Song in 1970 and was doing it as an independent production. If the unions found out where you were shooting an independent film in LA, they would come to your set and destroy your shit. So like they had to pretend that they were like doing other stuff. They had to have armed guards like at the end of the street
Yeah.
because the union would literally come and like mess you up. That's the amount of union control that they had in projects as late as the 1970s.
Mhm.
So by the 70s and 80s, this began to be disrupted, and I really think in the 90s and the 2000s, LA was entering sort of like what I would call like late stage cycle, sort of market dominance, because by that point it was really just the superficial elements that were like the most attractive thing. It was like pure glitz, pure glamour. The actual like power, like the technological power, was becoming more diffuse and was becoming more accessible to more and more people. And of course, once digital filmmaking rolled around and once these technological improvements in how we make films and even the style of like the big Hollywood productions, which is like they're essentially like, anywhere from like 50 to 80% shot in front of a green screen or an LED wall. Well,
Mhm.
at that point, like you can do that shit anywhere. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like the technology has made Los Angeles lose the power that has retained its centralized location for the past 100 years. So, when all of this comes up to like, what do they do? How do they keep film in LA? I mean, they got to do something. It's like what else can they do? If I was them, I would pass the biggest tax credit in the country.
Yeah.
I would go 40%, no cap, above the line. And then the biggest thing that I think that they can learn from the Georgia experience, because obviously we're speaking from an Atlanta-based perspective. We've had this huge film industry growth over the last 15
Yeah.
to 20 years, all because of our tax credits. But the biggest thing that the Georgia tax credits are missing, and this is the thing that I think that what could put, because right now America's like on the trailing edge of sort of film production. Like it's just too expensive to shoot here. But the
Yeah.
one thing that America always has is innovation. And right now, these tax incentives are not geared towards innovation. In Georgia, the biggest problem with the tax incentives is that you have a $500,000 minimum spend, which
Mhm.
basically decentivizes any independent filmmaker from shooting here unless you have $500,000 in
Mhm.
that you're spending $500,000 in the state. So if I was California, I would get rid of the minimum spend, make sure that these types of incentives are geared toward lower budget productions. I would potentially even consider putting in further incentives towards like more futuristic technologies such as VR or augmented reality type filmmaking, which I do think is a potential future of storytelling. And I would really go heavy on the innovation, as trying to spur innovation and really try to become that next wave of entertainment, because right now they're dying and they need to change the narrative.
Yeah, even if there was some sort of like tiered, I don't know, like if they're like so worried about like lowering the minimum, like can you like do something to like restructure it with tiers as far as what you're spending? I don't know. I'm not an
Absolutely. If we
economist,
did,
but
I mean, if we did that in Georgia, so right now it's 30%, right? For
mhm,
or 30
mhm.
30 or 35% for like
I think
if
it's
you over
30. I'll look it up while you talk. I
yeah,
think
I
it's
think
30.
30%. 30% for major productions. One of the big pluses is that, you're not beholden, it's a right to work state, so you're not beholden to union
Yeah.
labor. But
30%.
uh 30%. But
Mhm.
yeah, if they even lowered it down to like 20%, hell, even 15% of a below $500,000 spend, you have
Mhm.
no idea how far that would go for me, who just
Mhm.
spent $70,000 in this state to make a movie, paying Georgians that money. If I could get 15-20% of that back, that's like my entire like post like marketing
Yeah.
budget that I'm like currently having to like beg for. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
is such a
Yeah.
huge thing. It's for Georgia, it's not about independent filmmakers. It's not about innovation. It's just
No.
about like how can we bilk Hollywood for everything that they're worth.
Yeah, how
If
can we get every Marvel movie here? And then even those are
exactly.
like starting to film in Europe because it's cheaper.
The other big problem is that here you have to pay everybody's health insurance.
Yeah.
All these other countries that
They
people are
cover
going to
that in
film
this
in,
as well. Yeah. Mhm.
all these other countries that people are going to, they have a single payer system. You don't have to pay their health insurance. This is all caught up in such large macroeconomic political conversations. And so Los Angeles like really has to do something.
Yeah, especially considering like I mean, it's expensive for I think a filmmaker to like live here in the city and make, you know, have any type of like viable life and like y- LA is so much more expensive than Atlanta. Like you can't just expect people to like keep up with costs of living when they're not able to work where they live or like I don't know. It's just all I the arrogance I guess is the response to why they like haven't done anything about it yet, but it's been happening for a while and I don't really understand sort of the like laissez-faire attitude. But kudos to these two gals for trying to do something about it. But
And I will say some big LA news happened over the weekend. I don't know if you
okay.
saw
Oh my
that
gosh.
Luka Doncic, the possibly potentially greatest basketball player in the world, top
Uh-huh.
5 at least, was traded to the Los Angeles Lakers in a shocking trade. I've never been more shocked by a trade. Now, as a Lakers fan myself, and I've been a Lakers fan
mm,
since the very, very early Kobe years, the
okay.
Lakers have been living in this malaise of like the tail end of LeBron James's career. Like the Lakers used to stand for like glamour, glitz, but above all, greatness. And the Lakers were all about winning all the time, and it was all about championships, and they were pretty arrogant about it. They were emblematic of Los Angelinos' arrogance, and that's kind of why I like them. But they've been living in this malaise where it's like they're good, but they're never going to be great. They're not going to win a championship with a team that is constituted. Like as soon as LeBron leaves, like they're probably going to have a terrible, just going to sink back into like the pits of mediocrity. Their business model, the Lakers, even though they're the most valuable or second most valuable franchise in the NBA, like they can't compete with these other like big tech guys that have bought up teams like the Steve Ballmers of the world who, are worth like $80 billion. Like the Lakers are still like a family organization. Like they can't compete with that kind of money. So like, will the Lakers ever be able to be great again? I mean, they still have their brand recognition, and brand recognition is super powerful, but how will they do it? And then all of a sudden, in an instant, in one just totally shocking move, they become relevant for the next 10 years because they just got a 25-year-old super duper ultra star on their roster in Luka Doncic. And it really made me hopeful for the LA film industry. Like the LA film industry needs a Luka Doncic trade.
It's a Luka Doncic.
They do. They really do. And that's why I'm saying, because it's like, look, there's a lot of economists that will come out and say, hey, tax incentives, like they don't deliver everything that they're chalked up to be. They don't actually bring the wage growth and the job growth that they claim to. And there's probably a lot of viable things here, but this is about narrative. The Los Angeles narrative is just bad, 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 bad. They need to switch the narrative. They need a Luka Doncic trade.
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. I know the name Luka Doncic, but I don't know that much about him. But yes, congrats to you and the LA Lakers.
Yes, it'll be interesting.
All right, we're gonna get into some industry talk with this next one, and I might have to throw it over to you to explain this to me a little bit. I've read it, I get it, but sometimes I have a hard time with more business oriented things. Anyway, so basically I think what we're going to kind of like really focus in on, maybe this kind of like in an overall landscape, but this NBC-Universal restructuring that happened, I want to say like a week ago. So this is from a Deadline article that, despite my trouble understanding some things, does a pretty good job at breaking things down. And I wrote out a bunch of notes, and I do think I understand what happened. But I wondered if you could sort of take lead on this one for me, just to you've done a lot of research and done a lot of reading, I think.
Well, listen, don't talk up my research too much, because this is like, I don't spend my free time necessarily like boning up on corporate
vertical
restructuring.
integration. Yeah.
Yes. But we can basically summarize this. Okay. So as these major media conglomerates, remember, essentially six conglomerates control all the media that we watch.
Mm-hmm.
Six major companies control all the media in America, certainly. As the linear television model was dying, a lot of these companies were looking to try to begin a restructuring to transition them into the digital media marketplace. And so what they did is they horizontally integrated, in that they divided. There's two components of every media company. There's a studio side and there is a network side. Okay. Mm-hmm. The network side, of course, deals with the advertisers, with the programming, with like maintaining a working television network, the NBCs of the world, right? This is all from parent company Comcast. And then, of course, you have the studio side. So NBC, and it kind of becomes word soup, because you have an overarching company, Comcast, which runs NBC. NBC merged with Universal Studios, which you have NBC-Universal. So they divided the NBC and the Universal and the studio side to create the Universal Studio Group. Okay. And this is how Comcast has been creating shows and then running their series of networks for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it gets really complicated, because in this world of television, Universal Studio Group develops shows not just for NBC, but they also sell shows to all the other networks, right? So like they developed these shows and then will turn around and like sell to FBI to CBS, or The Equalizer to CBS. They'll sell Hacks to
Max.
to Max.
Mhm.
And all the major players are doing this. Like Disney is behind the CBS show Tracker and the Netflix show Nobody Wants This, and Warner Brothers is behind Apple TV's Ted Lasso. Right. So you have these studio groups under
Yeah.
each media conglomerate selling shows both to their own network and to others. And then you have the network side doing all the business advertising stuff. Okay.
Mhm.
The reason why they were doing this is because the companies had grown so large, and with this push to digital, they thought the studio would be more effective selling streaming content to streaming companies as its own entity. But as the streaming wars have begun to play out, Netflix is runaway winner, and everybody else is sort of arguing, fighting, and jockeying for
Second place.
diminishing market share. Well, Disney's going to be second place. They're
Oh, there you go.
jockeying
Yeah.
and arguing for third through 3 through 10. A bit really.
Mhm.
Um, People are beginning to look at the Netflix model, which is vertically integrated, where studio and network are sort of one streamlined entity, usually headed by just a few people who are both making decisions on the money side of the network and also making money decisions on the development side and the execution side of the individual shows. And so they've been looking to now recreate that model, which is really how all these networks operated like 10 years ago, but it was in a landscape of linear television that they understood.
Mhm.
So WBD began to do this a little bit a couple years ago as they prepare to spin off their cable networks. But David Zaslav is also like, he's like courting a buyer every 5 seconds, and
Yeah.
like it's not really defined. The big thing that has changed is that NBC president Donna Langley has decided to reintegrate vertically NBC by taking Universal Studio Group and combining it with the Comcast network side. So she has promoted Perlena Igbokwe, who is a longtime producer, head of development. She has a long history of success. She worked at Showtime, where she developed
Mhm.
Dexter and Nurse Jackie. She started at Universal Television in 2016. She oversaw the development of The Good Place, FBI, Russian Doll. So now she has been promoted to essentially being the head of NBC-Universal on the network side and on the studio side. And the reason why this is interesting is because it's a further power consolidation within the new media market.
Mhm.
Perlena Ogbakwe is going to have incredible power over the Comcast universe, over pretty much everything they're buying and selling. She's handling all scripted content for the Comcast networks and for Peacock, the streaming service. She's not overseeing unscripted, which went to somebody else. But this is like further consolidation within the market. You no longer have multiple parties jockeying for power and favor within an organization. It's going to streamline it and potentially make it more efficient on the Comcast side. But it also comes with risks because power consolidated within the hands of a single person, they could make mistakes,
Yeah.
and this is a very dangerous time for Peacock and all of these legacy media organizations. So, and people are basically looking at this and saying, is this really the new trend that all these media organizations are going to follow? They're going to unhorizontally integrate and vertically integrate, which will only continue to increase the power consolidation at the top of all the television execs across Hollywood, which then affects all types of independent creators, showrunners, writers, actors, because the people who are deciding whether or not you make it onto the screen of millions of Americans is going to be in the hands of like 5 or 6 people at the end of the day.
Yeah. So they've kind of like gotten rid of the way this article put it, it's like a church and state setup. Like it's just one executive branch, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it. And from what I understand, and you kind of mentioned this is like basically what was happening 10, 15 years ago, just under a different model, no, as far as like linear television. So they've kind of like basically come full circle on themselves, which is often what they seem to do.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely an element that's sort of like reinventing the wheel, but when you're operating with it, like because the linear television space, as I've talked about at length on this show before,
Hmm.
because the linear television space was bound by the physical reality of not just like cables and like tethering cables together across the nation, but it was also bound
Mhm.
by the reality of time. You kind of had these physically imposed guardrails on sort of any decision making that one could make, and you were incredibly limited in terms of like the what you could do, and the scheduling was so it took so much time to kind of like find to fit the new things onto the TV schedule. You were just bound. You were constricted by the actual mechanics of how to operate a linear
Mhm.
television network. In the internet, you are bound by nothing. And
Yeah.
so this decision making power is could be potentially a lot more influential. It's also a lot more dangerous, both to the company and to the individual creators involved.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I thank you for giving that detailed explanation. It all makes sense when you read it. I just sometimes my brain gets a little fuzzy when I go into business speak.
Oh, it is mind numbing.
Yeah.
It is mind numbing.
Okay.
But listen, like it's one of the reasons like why I love this show, why I love doing this show is like because I spent 15 years of my professional life like wanting to be an artist in film,
Mhm.
and I had absolutely no idea what was happening behind the
Right.
hood. I thought being an artist
Yeah.
in film was just like, farting around and looking cool and writing cool stuff. And like that is not the driver
Mhm.
of this medium at all. It is freaking Donna Langley vertically integrating Comcast. That is
Yeah.
what's driving so many things that affect thousands and thousands of artists across this country. This is also all sets them up for sort of what has been claimed to be like the next era of mergers and of M&A
Yeah.
in Hollywood under this
Mhm.
new Trump
Administration. Yeah.
administration FCC rules. Is a vertically integrated system going to be easier for a merger or acquisition or a potential bundle? Like some of the things that people are talking about is like Peacock will soon become available on Amazon Prime Video channels. So that's like a
Mhm.
major thing that further Perlena Igbokwe is going to be like in charge of. Also, like, could a larger bundle between NBC between Peacock and Max, or potentially a Warner Brothers Peacock merger? Like, is Comcast and Peacock going to emerge as the buyer for WBD? Is David Zaslav going
Mhm.
to try to like make something happen here? I mean, as both these companies like ditch off their dying cable networks and then reconcentrate power within the organization, that creates opportunities to do these deals that like people at the top are clearly thirsting for.
Yeah, and it's this unscripted aspect of this is interesting. Like it seems like so correct me if I'm reading this incorrectly, but Igbagwe will do kind of unscripted at NBC, but someone else is going to be kind of doing the Bravo and Peacock aspects of it. And I wonder because that seems to be like there's like one section of this article where they're like, that's like the part of this whole restructuring that's getting a less enthusiastic reaction. Because I guess they're like kind of splitting the power, like splitting this streaming versus like NBC itself. Do you have any thoughts on that? I thought it was interesting that people were like seem to be more upset about that because it doesn't really seem upsetting to me on its face.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I don't I mean, I don't really without I'm not a reality person. I'm not a reality fan, so I don't have
Yeah.
like a super vested interest, and I don't understand the
I have a
mechanics other
vested
than that.
interest in the traders, but
Other than that Frances Berwick, she will be running
doing the Peacock stuff, yeah.
Bravo and Peacock unscripted. I mean, I look, dividing the unscripted content like between two people is interesting. I mean, we've seen a big shift in sort of like the unscripted buyers, and like they're facing a
Mhm.
lot of competition from Netflix, who is emerging as like
And
the
that's like
big unscripted
yeah,
buyer these
and that's
days.
what's making them a lot of or at least, like, getting them a lot of headlines now, like, stuff like Love is Blind and The Traders, for that matter, is, like, really, really popular and doing well, so it makes sense, I guess, to wanna have, like, a double hand on that? I don't know. But
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm out of my element when talking about sort of unscripted content. Not that I'm in my element talking about horizontal and vertically integrated
Sure.
mega conglomerates, but but I'm definitely like way out over my skis when talking about
All I'll
unscripted.
say about that is I think maybe you should get into The Traders. It's really fun. It's a lot of fun. You don't have to really pay attention. You can, like, skip through the challenges. Those aren't that exciting and just watch all the murder and mystery unfold. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell from you. Thank you. I will add it to the list. I can't say that it will move to the top of the list. I just
Okay.
got to one day. Okay, I'm working my way through one day right
Got
now,
it, got it, got
and
it.
it's taking me like 10 days at a time. But I will say this. I will run through a couple of quick numbers here because they have their work cut out for them over at
Mhm.
Comcast and at Peacock. I mean Peacock in particular. So Peacock, one of the major issues is that it is the only U.S. only streaming service that is competing among the like big six right now. They're
I learned
completely
this when I
US
tried to
based.
watch The Traders in India. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So huge limitations there. It's been stuck at
Mhm.
36 million subscribers for a long time. They are currently operating at a quarterly loss of $372 million, which is down from the quarterly loss of $825 million from a year ago. But it is a complete outlier from most media streamers, which have kind of eked their way to a path of profitability. Granted, that profitability is just fractions of what it used to be on cable, but they're eking out a little bit of profitability. Peacock has racked up more than $9 billion in losses since its launch in 2019, and it is projected to lose more than $1 billion this year, just as the cost of their new NBA rights deal kicks in. So, tough
Good job,
times over at
everyone.
Peacock. Yeah. Claps all around. Perlena, could you get on that? And we. So yeah, I mean, listen, I said in my 2025 look ahead that I thought we would see a streamer die. I still think that that's the case, but I am actually thinking that we're gonna potentially see some sort of Peacock Paramount or Peacock Max kind of merger type
Mm,
situation.
yeah. As long as I still get the Traders, that's okay.
Sammie, see, you're as focused on the traders as this conversation as you usually are in Challengers in every episode. Shocking that Challengers hasn't been brought up
Challengers,
until
well,
this point, honestly.
here we go. You made our streak continue. Challengers is on the table. So yeah. I do walk around my house singing that to myself. So, but all right, I think that's all we got this week. But do you have anything you want to plug? Anything coming up? Anything you want to talk about before we head off here?
This has been a joy. Yeah, nothing. Actually, by the time this airs, I will have just done it. I will have just introduced High and Low over at Videodrome's presentation at the Terra Theater.
Mm-hmm.
It was last night. You missed it. It was amazing. It was incredible. It was
Yeah.
unbelievable. That movie's so good. I will be back with them in the month of March, introducing Stray Dogs. So if you are in the Atlanta area and you want to come see the third installment of our Kurosawa noir series, we've been playing these 3 Kurosawa noirs over at Terra.
Mm-hmm.
It's been awesome. Yeah, that's really all that I got going on right now.
Awesome. I'm trying to think if I have anything coming up. Not really. I will have seen High and Low at the Terra by the time this comes out. So
Whoop,
that's
whoop.
exciting. But yeah, nothing much. Subscribe to Seen by Rough Draft if you want to hear more from me. I'll be at Scout TV Fest this weekend. That is something that's coming up. So that's exciting.
Very
I'm
cool.
going to get to hopefully talk to a few cool people, see some cool panels. But yeah, that's what I got going on.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Sammie. This has been super fun. Thank you all so much for listening. As always, you can follow us at Crash Zoom Podcast on Instagram. You can follow us at Crash Zoom Podcast on TikTok, but I can't access it because I got a new phone and I can't get TikTok on my new phone. I will keep saying this
Rip.
until anything changes, which is so funny. So yeah, we have a zombie TikTok account. You can also email us, crashzoompod@gmail.com. I'm sorry, crashzoompodcast@gmail.com. That's crashzoompodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Do you think Los Angeles needs to institute a 40% tax credit? Do you think that vertical integration is the future of the mega conglomerate space? Let us know your thoughts. As always, this has been a great time, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Been great. Look forward to talking to you too. I'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye.